welcome to the SCI Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird, and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, the leading Luke Cutford.
Come with me.
This week we're talking about climate catastrophes and divisive demonstrations, but first we have a Spotify update.
How many of the followers am I leading?
47,898, but that's not what I want to talk about, Luke. I don't even want to talk about all those followers. Tell everyone to follow us. I don't even want to talk about them right now. What I want to talk about is us being back in the charts on Spotify.
Legends.
Yeah, do you know, we weren't in the charts for a while because for some reason we were a comedy podcast and competition there is rough.
That's like every podcast claims to be a podcast.
Every podcast says they're comedy, but they're not as funny as us. They're funnier. We're in the Spotify charts. We're officially, on the 4th of November 2023, we're the 43rd best and coolest and perhaps even sexiest science podcast in the UK.
I think definitely sexiest.
Oh, absolutely. Infinite Monkey Cage ain't got nothing on us.
Brian Cox does have that hair, though.
Oh, Brian Cox ain't got these cocks, Luke. We have sexy penises.
Excuse me?
Anyway, shall I get into the question of this week?
Yes, please.
So the question that I've got for you, I'm going to ask you, and if you want to answer it, you can answer down in the comments. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever else, get down to the YouTube comments, or failing that, blow up an oil pipeline and climb inside of it, and then just write your message in the leftover oil, and then unblow up the pipeline, because that is a crime. And I don't know, the newspapers will probably talk about it or something. And the question is, do you agree with Just Stop Oil's protests?
Oh, goodness me, this is so complicated. I don't... Well, I'll find out.
It's yes or no, Luke? It's yes or no?
I agree with the sentiment, yeah.
Yes or no?
Oh, God, I don't know. Yeah, probably on balance, yeah.
Luke Cutforth hereby says that he is behind all Just Stop Oil protests and any and all of the consequences. You heard it here first. No, so we are talking today about Just Stop Oil, their protests, and perhaps the sort of effectiveness of them. I could get into who Just Stop Oil are, and I will. So, according to Just Stop Oil themselves, they are a coalition of groups working together to ensure that the government commits to ending all new licenses and consents for the exploration, development, and production of fossil fuels in the UK. They also demand that UK government makes a statement that it will immediately halt all future licensing and consents for the exploration, development, and production of fossil fuels in the UK. And they also go on to say the scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. I think that's rather agreeable, don't you, Luke?
Do I think that climate change
yes or no?
Sure. Yeah, maybe.
You heard it here first. So Luke Cutforth agrees that climate change is bad.
Yeah, I do agree with that. That I agree with, yeah.
Yeah, good.
And that we should do something about it. More
there
than
you
we're
go.
currently doing. Yes.
Spot on, man. Yeah, absolutely. No. So yeah, that is generally what Just Stop Oil are. They are kind of like a protesty group, right? A group that is dedicated to stopping fossil fuels or new fossil fuels in the UK. I mean, any explanation I give of them and their goals is kind of, I guess, second to their name, because it does what it says on the tin. Just Stop Oil. Just stop oil.
Yeah, but I also think anything you say about their goals or anything of that, like from a public perspective, is second or third indeed to their tactics, which is the main thing about them.
Well, yes,
as in like that's why we're talking about them. We're talking about them because of their tactics.
Oh, I was talking about them because they sent me. No, no.
Are they paying you?
No, they're not. I actually did try to contact Just Stop Oil, and I was like, "Hey, we're going to do an episode on you guys. Do you guys want to come and chat with us about that?" Didn't get a response. So
just stop responding. That's their that's their policy.
Fair enough. But no, no one has motivated me to do this. I just find it a relatively interesting topic, and I'm going to get my soapbox out later on. I'm going to stand on top of it, and oh boy, am I going to holler. So we could talk about their tactics in a bit. I mean, if you're aware of who Just Stop Oil are, you'll probably be aware of their tactics. But first, I'd like to talk about the impact of oil and fossil fuels, or rather the impacts, because this is a multifaceted thing. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of fossil fuels and climate change, I just want to shout out Lena Norms. I was on her podcast recently. Lena Norms, friend of the pod. You may have seen her on this podcast. You can go watch me and Lena on her podcast, No Books on a Dead Planet, where we kind of spoke about a book that we read about climate change. And oh boy, was it not a fun book to read. It was devastating. But the episode, I think, is likely quite good. If you like this, you'll probably like that. So go ahead and give Lena some love. But Luke, I ask you, what do fossil fuels do to planets?
Okay, so the main thing that they do is that they create sort of a greenhouse effect when you burn them.
Greenhouse is good.
Greenhouses are good if you want to cook vegetables, like make vegetables, grow vegetables. They're good in that sense. And they're good if you're a being that likes to exist at 60, 70 degrees Celsius. That would be lovely for you. And in fact, they are good for us. Like there is a greenhouse effect of our own ozone layer already. And then the certain level at which it's at is good for humans. But we kind of don't want it to be any more. But every time we go for a drive or we sort of get an aeroplane or buy things that are made out of plastic because that subsidizes the other oil products, we kind of make it hotter a little bit, and that's not good for us.
Are you saying that you and me single-handedly have been causing climate change? Maybe we should stop doing all of those things.
I've been trying to cover it up, but they're coming for us, Corey.
Oh, no.
We've been doing it the whole time.
I didn't even know. Why didn't you tell me? No. You're so right. Greenhouse gases do this thing like a greenhouse. Heat comes in, and then the greenhouse gases basically kind of reflect it back in, stop the heat from escaping. Very, very simply put. We've done episodes on climate change, and also this is like really simple high school, primary school stuff. Go and look it up if you want to understand it. You'll find plenty of resources explaining it in greater detail than we're going to here. But yeah, the use of fossil fuels creates an increased greenhouse effect, which has just been increasing the temperatures on the planet. Since the 1980s, each decade has been warmer than the previous one. And nearly all land areas are seeing more hot days and heat waves. You could take that from anecdotal experience as well. That's one of those interesting things wherein anecdotal experience and sort of data, the bigger data, kind of tell the same story, right? I mean, if you think about it, how many heat waves, or not necessarily strictly defined as heat waves, but sort of hot days, have we had in London over the past 8 years? I mean, for me, I moved here 8 years ago. I can see the difference. I can literally feel the difference in temperature over the past 8 years. When I first moved here, I was not having to take a couple days of summer where I did absolutely nothing because it was far too hot to move around in my flat, whereas that has just become a common occurrence now. Hotter temperatures, that can cause more wildfires and increase the temperatures in the Arctic, which causes water to melt, which means sea levels rise, which means people are moved out of their homes because, things near the water start to flood. And then also because it means we've got less crop production. It's bad. It's knock-on effects. It's not good. Too hot is no bueno, okay? And I know you like saying, hey, but summer's supposed to be hot. And every now and time then there's a hot thing. And actually, isn't it nice when it's hot in summer? Yes, it is nice when it's hot in summer. It's not nice when it's so hot that people die. So storms can also be caused by greenhouse gases, by the use of fossil fuels and whatnot. You've probably seen those big old destructive storms, natural disasters, as we used to call them, I guess. They've kind of become more frequent and more intense in recent years. So when temperatures rise, more moisture evaporates, and then that means there's more rainfall and flooding, which means more destructive storms. So cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, they basically pick up warm water from the ocean surface and they destroy homes, cities, communities, businesses, all things that we like to have around us. And not only is there more wet, Luke, what else is there? The opposite of more wet.
More dry.
Yeah.
And more cold.
Yep. And why is more dry bad?
More dry bad because places will become deserts.
Why is desert bad? I like desert good? No?
Not much stuff live in desert. Not many people live in desert. Not much water in desert. not a great place.
That's very true. So increased droughts mean less available water, and less available water. I mean, let's be realistic here. Water is one of, if not the most important natural resource that we have. We all need it to live. Pretty much every living thing needs it to live. I would actually say every living thing. Viruses, yeah, they need them. Look. Okay, I can't be specific about biology, but what I will say is that water is pretty necessary for life, generally speaking. And yeah, less clean sort of non-salty water, less clean fresh water makes it harder to live, right? Water scarcity means that those prices will increase, which means the poorest people, the most vulnerable, will be probably most affected. Not good, okay? So droughts can also cause, increased wildfires, like we were saying. It can affect crops and food production, all of that sort of stuff. If we heat up the ocean, so the ocean is pretty good. It's supposed to absorb heat, right? Well, it's not supposed to. It's just there, and it does that. But if as it takes up more and more heat, then it's obviously going to change what's going on in there. For example, some creatures cannot live in the warmer temperatures of the ocean. For example, I think it's is it coral reefs? Coral reef bleaching that can be caused by increased temperatures. Some animals, basically the temperature that their eggs are at, determine what sex they are, so that can cause more problems there. On top of just the pretty basic of sort of like, we can't survive at temperatures hotter than 50, 60 degrees, I think. Some creatures in the waters can't survive with, a few degrees of increased temperature, which causes problems there. Also, gosh, if there's more carbon dioxide, which is being absorbed into the water, then it becomes more acidic. And look, acid's fine, but super acidic ocean, it's not the best thing.
That'll do stuff to the coral reefs as well, I think.
I probably will do, yeah. It will. Not very good for them. And then also other marine life as well, because no one likes to live in an acidic ocean. Some people maybe do. I don't know. I can't say that, but acidic ocean, bad. And all of that can, accumulate to create the loss of species. So things just going extinct through habitat loss, through increased temperatures, through all of these sort of natural disasters that we're talking about, even through human activity to kind of try and avoid all of these horrible things that we're causing. Not enough food, which we've mentioned, so these droughts, changes in temperature, and even increased rainfall, or colder winters, all of these things impact food production because whether we like it or not, we pretty much rely on plants to survive, plants and fungi, and then animals eat the plants, and then we eat the animals sometimes, losers. Losers eat animals. I eat plants, bruh. But no, anyway, crop production will be drastically changed because, the plants can't grow in the conditions that we are creating. Fish as well. People eat fish. They live in the water. They don't like it when it's acidic or too hot. All of these sorts of things, they don't like it.
They'll start complaining.
They start getting wound up.
They're going to have real issues with this.
Oh, God. You think salmon are annoying now? No. And then health risks as well. Air pollution, disease, extreme weather events, displacement from those weather events, rising sea levels, meaning that people living in one place that was fine, it's now no longer fine to live, they need to move somewhere else. And look, as you're well aware, countries deal pretty well with refugees and migrants, right?
Well, yeah, that's one thing I wanted to talk about actually, is that some of the people who are arguing against doing anything about global warming, or arguing it's not going to be as bad, or just generally slowing down global warming stuff, are also the people who don't like migrants. Now, that's a bit of a sweeping statement, but I think it would probably correlate. I think broadly it would correlate.
I think you're right, yeah.
And global warming is going to cause massive amounts of migration because not only, like Corey said earlier, are there sea rises mean that coastal towns could disappear, right? What was once a coastal town will now be under the water.
Oh, as Ben Shapiro so smartly said, Luke. Just sell the homes and move somewhere else.
Just sell the homes. Sell them to who, Ben? Who's going to buy the homes? Anyway, yes, but also just if it's too hot, people are going to migrate to sort of colder areas. Mm-hmm. Like you could have England becoming like what Spain's like and Scotland becoming what England's like, right? And then Spain will become like what something else is like. Mm. And then there might be a whole area of the earth that's just sort of generally not very habitable. Like it's, you already have areas of America where you like run between buildings to get from aircon to aircon. And that's America. And like, you know, that's, yeah, it's not good for lots of things. There's so many effects. It spirals so much.
Do you want the whole world to be Arizona? I didn't think so. No offense, Arizona, but you're too hot. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then poverty and displacement, which we've kind of touched on as well, but poverty is something that is likely going to be increased as well, because if there's less space and resources are more scarce and blah, 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 we're not very good at distributing resources, and we've got pretty plentiful resources right now. Imagine if they're not that anymore. Not good. And yeah, fossil fuels, the use of oil, pretty much just causes all of these things. Like, it's pretty straightforward. You burn fossil fuels, all this stuff happens. Like, that's basically it. I could get into the nitty gritty, but it's relatively straightforward. You know, you use more oil and gas and coal and whatnot, this stuff happens more.
And we have also known this for like most of the time we've been doing it. Like we knew it in the 70s. It's like like with smoking, when they all the tobacco companies knew about the dangerous effects of smoking and they lied to Congress about the smoking.
Yeah.
Same thing with all the oil companies. They all knew, this is going somewhere not very good, but we made a lot of money, so let's just keep doing it and tell everyone to shush.
But Republicans said that it was not true. Or then they changed their mind and say that it is happening, but it's supposed to happen. It's normal. And I think now they're at the point of saying, no, humans did cause it, but also it's fine. I think that's where we're at, right? Where the right is like, global warming is happening, but it's fine.
Well, yeah. So it might be that they're going like, I have a really interesting thing about this, actually. So it might be that they're going, they look at the historical temperature things and they're like, look, the Earth has gone through natural cycles of different temperatures throughout history, and it's been hotter than it is now in the past. And it's like, well, yes, but we don't know. We probably do know, actually, that lots of stuff probably died. The other thing is that you can say it's supposed to happen, but you might be, okay, this is, again, broad strokes. It's supposed to happen, right? You could look at that as it's supposed to happen from like an almost biblical perspective and go, this is what's supposed to happen. This is okay. But then what's supposed to happen to the dinosaurs was that a meteorite smashed into the earth and they all died. No one's saying that life won't survive global warming.
Yeah.
There's a period of time which I read about, which I absolutely found so fascinating, where trees invented some protein. What, have I spoken about this before? I probably have.
No, I just love the concept of trees inventing. Like they're sitting in their little tree labs and they're like, Eureka! Eutreka! You won't believe what I found.
Trees basically.
A branch new invention. Bow down to me.
Okay, cool. Anyway, at some point in history, trees basically figured out how to get really tall, and they made, I think it's a protein, I can't remember what it is. You might be able to Google it. I don't know. They basically made this structure that they could that meant they could grow really tall and they could support.
Oh, lignin, probably.
Lignin, right? Lignin, exactly. Yeah. And there was nothing on Earth that could break down lignin.
Oh, yeah.
And so there was these millions of years where there was just dead trees, like just lying around the place, and there was no natural no natural process on Earth that could sort of do this. And Earth is a sort of a cyclical system. Like stuff creates byproducts, and other things use those byproducts to create energy for themselves. We do that, the plants do that, etc. But there was this long time where the trees had made lignin and nothing could break it down. And we've sort of done that with plastic, and we put way more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than is good for us. And we've created very quickly a situation that sort of the rest of the ecosystem isn't sort of adapted for.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And if we carry on doing that, the ecosystem will adapt to it, most likely. It will. There will eventually, if you leave it long enough, be probably some kind of life that will eat plastic, right?
Oh, yeah.
It will eat all our plastic, and it will thrive. It will do great, right? We may well be dead, right? And so you can take the stance of like, this is what's supposed to happen, but only if you also you're claiming to take a universal stance, which is like, this is what's supposed to happen. Species go extinct.
Yeah.
You can make the claim that like, well, the purpose of the humans is to pull up all the carbon from under the ground and put it back in the atmosphere, because having loads of carbon in the atmosphere might be really good for some life, but it's not good for this life.
No.
So I don't think the Republicans get to make that claim.
Yeah, I just feel like Look, I think the claim that is often made is, this is supposed to happen in the context of, the Earth naturally cycles. And then when it was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that climate change is caused by human activity, they were like, well, actually, it's fine. It's fine. No, we're not gonna. You keep on saying that the world is going to, all these disasters are going to happen. Where are they happening? They haven't happened. You silly. Let's just forget all the people dying during the heat waves and whatnot in the UK. Do you know when old people die when it gets really hot? Those are deaths from climate change. Stupid. I'm sorry to call you stupid. That's not very productive. It's not very kind. But I am frustrated. And Jesus, man, when Texas froze, and yes, their infrastructure being, their power infrastructure and whatnot being separate from the rest of the country is a sort of political and sort of social problem, definitely. But climate change is the reason that it got so cold in Texas that all that stuff happened, right? Like this stuff, man, like people see climate change happening in front of their eyes and they don't recognize it because it happens on a scale that's just a little bit too slow to really think about, right? Like, I mean, it's so fast. Realistically, so fast. In the past 10 years, things have changed so bloody much. Like, I think the hottest in the city where I'm from, I remember saying this on the podcast, the city where I am from, it didn't get hotter than 25 degrees or something or whatever for a long, long time. And I'm pretty sure in the past 10 years, the 5 hottest days in that city were in the past 10 years. Like, what the hell, man? What the hell? It is happening at a scale where we can see it. But it's just slow enough that if you don't want to see it, you don't have to. Because this year isn't that much hotter than last year, which isn't that much hotter than last year. But this year is definitely way hotter than 10 years ago.
Yeah,
okay?
It's a real problem with us, isn't it? We're not very good at this.
No.
We're good at a scale of a week or two.
Many of us are quite good at it, right?
Well, but we're good at it because we've developed tools to do it.
Yeah, many of us are good at it because of the tools that we've developed. But also many of us like to bury our heads in the sand because money or power or something that isn't going to matter when you've caused a complete climate and ecological collapse. Anyway, shall we get onto the Just Stop Oil protests?
Okay.
But maybe an ad first. Ding-a-ling-ling, is that the ad bell?
I think it is, but it's rather quiet this time.
Well, Luke, we want to keep a big old secret about this SCI GUYS merch.
Yes. Please do not tell anybody and do not purchase any of it. Otherwise, people will find out.
They might see you wearing our merch or displaying our merch and think, oh, wow, what a cool person. And I'll tell you this, as a cool person myself, having people think you're a cool person can be very, very stressful.
Yeah, we can't have that. And we also can't have you supporting the show to exist that you're enjoying right now.
Yeah, so absolutely under no circumstances should you go to normalcitizen.store and pick up some SCI GUYS merch. Some SCI GUYS merch like beanies and posters and t-shirts and calendars and cool stuff like that. Definitely don't go to that store and buy that.
Goodness me, that's an awful lot of stuff that I'm not going to purchase.
Absolutely, Luke. Now let's get back to the show before anyone listens to us.
God, I really hope we got away with that one.
So the Just Stop Oil protests, Luke, before we get into the specific protests themselves, I just want to tell you a little bit about direct action. Do you know what direct action is?
Yes, where you sort of do stuff rather than just complain. You do stuff.
Yeah. It's
disruptions.
Yeah, it's a specific way of complaining where you force people to listen to you complaining, basically. Very good. We like direct action. It's the reason that we have so many of the things that we currently... 5-day work week, you like that?
Women's votes.
Well, yeah, I mean,
they blew up some stuff. They jumped in front of horses.
I'm just saying I could go either way on women's votes, you know.
Oh my God.
I could go... No, not women. I just don't think that anyone should be allowed to vote except for me and you.
Well, thank you for bringing me into your circle.
I don't like your response. I don't think you should be allowed to vote anymore.
You're gonna behead me now.
Yeah, no, just me. But yeah, no, direct action. It's protest that kind of exists outside of your sort of normal parliamentary politics. And it's a very broad thing. Basically, most of the sort of protests that you can think of are sort of direct action. So you could sort of go into a forest and occupy it and stop people from cutting it down if we're talking about sort of environmental sort of movements, right? So in the Hambach forest in Germany, activists literally just went into this forest and they were there and they were like, you're not cutting it down because we are here. You have to kill a person to kill a tree. Haha. And that genuinely kind of works. Extinction Rebellion, you'll probably remember them when they shut down all of London and I had to sit in an office and listen to people say, well, climate change is bad, but they made it difficult for me to get to work today. Do you know what else is going to make it difficult for you to get to work today? Is climate change. In a little while. Think. Anyway, we've also had people self-immolating. Do you know what that is, Luke?
It's when you hurt yourself.
It's when you burn
Monks
yourself.
Set themselves on fire.
Yeah, immolation is burning. So, yep, there's been a couple cases of people self-immolating for different reasons. I think recently, a couple years ago, or maybe last year, not too long ago, at the time of recording, someone literally burned themselves just with fire. They set themselves on fire to protest against sort of climate stuff. I could be more specific.
Really?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And it actually did have an impact a little bit. You can look up that story yourself. It's quite an interesting one. But yeah, essentially, these sort of tactics, the idea behind them is to just cause disruption and essentially get into the system and say, work better, system, broken system, work better.
It's to sort of shock everyone out of the sort of stupor we're all in of inaction, I suppose.
Yeah, to break the status quo to an extent, right? Because ultimately, outside of protest, right? And protest is incredibly important. Protest, we love protest. Protest should be disruptive in the sense that if you're able to just ignore a protest, I don't think it's really doing its job properly. But protest is a very, very important part of democracy because while yes, we are able to vote for our MPs, vote for our council, and vote for whatnot, like different people who represent us and all of that sort of stuff, that's not always going to be enough, right? Like, we're not always going to be able to get the results we need by operating within the bounds of the system. And the system itself can be unjust, and that's something that I think a lot of people kind of fail to recognize in a lot of cases, right? Like freeing slaves, for example, was illegal and a crime. And people that did that were criminals. Harriet Tubman, criminal. What's her name? Rosa Parks, criminal. She didn't free the slaves, but I'm sure she would have if she had the opportunity.
Woke King, Rosa Parks.
But no, do you know what I mean? These people are all criminals. And I don't say that in a negative sense. I say it in a very positive sense. They are criminals in the best way possible. Being a criminal just means you've done something that's against the law. And sometimes laws are unjust. And sometimes you need to step outside the law in order to make a difference. The suffragettes are a clear example of that, as are many protests throughout history. Okay? So direct action, essentially just protest that is like, it does what it says on the tin, right? It's kind of causing that sort of disruption to the system instead of sort of working within it. And yeah, usually, this wouldn't be used as a sort of like, oh, this thing isn't working, boom. Let's do some direct action. You want to try and go through other means first, usually, right? And it's generally used as a sort of last resort when voting and whatnot don't really work as well as they should or as quickly as they should. But a non-comprehensive list of the Just Stop Oil demonstrations and protests. They closed roads, including the M25 motorway, stopped a theatre performance of Les Mis in London, interrupted a BBC Proms concert at the Royal Albert Hall, stopped play at the Wimbledon Tennis Championships, disrupted the Ashes test at Lord's, interrupted play at the World Snooker Championship, and perhaps most infamously, they threw soup at Vincent van Gogh's painting of some sunflowers at the National Gallery.
Yeah, so I think I'm glad you mentioned the soup at the end there, because I think what most of your list doesn't capture is the fact that the tactics they use, right? So in the case of like Wimbledon, for example, because you can't bring things into Wimbledon, like you can't bring a pot of paint into Wimbledon, what they did is they purchased a Wimbledon own branded puzzle and then ran on the court and threw all the puzzle pieces everywhere.
Brilliant.
So because it's about creating like just enough disruption that you get a news headline, for example, out of it. Or when you're saying they blocked a road, they glue themselves to the road so that even if someone says, get up and tries to pick you up, there's nothing you can do. You have to wait until someone turns up with some sort of anti-glue and removes you from the road.
Yeah.
So that's what's so ingenious about it, is because it's about making disruption in a way with very, very limited resources.
Yeah.
And like interrupting the assumptions of an event like Wimbledon, which is like, well, no one's going to run on the court and put loads of glitter on it or loads of puzzle pieces on it. And because of those sort of social expectations that we're not going to do that, if you break those social expectations, it's very provocative to the average person who's just going about their day, and also very disruptive in some cases, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of add to it, I want to point out that, Wimbledon, Les Mis, all of these things are going to get attention as well. That's the key point. It's disruption to get attention, and not just in the sense that you're sort of talking about like, oh, it's breaking social norms, but like people are watching Wimbledon. Do you know what I mean? Like if something happens at Wimbledon, everyone is going to know about it. Les Mis, that's something that people are going to. If someone interrupts a production of Les Mis, you're probably going to hear about it if it's on the West End, right? Because like, it's Les Mis.
Well, my favourite thing about the Les Mis one is not just that it's on the West End. It's that if you're watching Les Mis, you're missing the message, and you're annoyed. You're missing the message of Les Mis. And I think that's what's so genius about it, is you could have picked any show on the West End, but like, pay attention to the story of Les Mis.
No, look, you're misunderstanding. They are not. What if someone wanted to go and see Les Mis and they're not able to afford to see Les Mis again, huh? What if that? They should have thought about that before they disrupted Les Mis with their horrible disruptive protest. Why didn't they do a different kind of protest, like the peaceful ones you see in Les Mis? Yeah, man, like that. You're so right. That actually, like, so many of these different things have wound me up, but not because of what they've done. Yeah, disrupt the snooker championship. Do you know what? If you want to destroy a piece of priceless art, do it. I don't care. They didn't destroy the painting as well, by the way. We spoke about this on the podcast way back when it happened. It was protected. They just threw soup at it. They cleaned off basically the plexiglass thing in front of the painting.
But there was a bit of soup on the frame, Corey.
Who cares?
Bit of soup on the frame.
Oh, good Lord.
Another casualty of climate change.
Oh no, the world is ending and suddenly there's some soup on an old frame. Good God. But seriously, man, like, if people bring up, oh well, they stopped ambulances and whatnot, and that might have even been Insulate Britain that they were saying, oh, they stopped ambulances, but I'm pretty sure they let sort of emergency vehicles through. And even so, like, even if, right, let's say someone literally died, like a person literally died because of a protest, right? I'm not saying that is okay. But if you're that up in arms about one single person dying because of a protest, you should be much, much angrier at like what they are pointing the protest towards, right?
This is the
because
bit
many more people are dying from the thing they're protesting, and they wouldn't have to protest if the government just did the right thing that we all agree they should do. But yeah, no, we'll get into that more in a second. I just kind of wanted to touch on the different kind of protests that they've done, so we've got an idea of all of these sorts of things. And the key thing here as well is the disruption that's caused is very public. And it really winds people up, right? Like, sports things, theater, arts. It's affecting normal people and not necessarily targeting the people who can make these decisions. And that's what kind of winds people up. But the point behind those protests is quite literally to get people talking about it, right? Like, you're not going to be that bothered about Wimbledon, being disrupted once in your entire life if it means that, you're able to live your entire life with many more Wimbledons instead of, climate change.
Giving up one Wimbledon. And you're investing in many Wimbledons.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. But yeah, no, let's talk a little bit about protest laws because, blocking roads is illegal. Apparently the maximum penalty for the willful obstruction of a highway in England and Wales is 51 weeks in prison. Just shy of a year. Yeah, 1 week. Do it just before Christmas. Here you go.
Out in time for Christmas.
Do it in January. You're set. Sorted. No worries there. But I'd love if that were how someone had done it. Do you know what I mean? They're like, 52 is a bit harsh. They might actually miss Christmas, so we'll give them the 51. But no, if you sort of breach that, you could be held in contempt of court. Sorry, if anyone breaching an injunction can be held in contempt of court and could face imprisonment, an unlimited fine, and seizure of assets. Several transport bodies, including the National Highways and Transport for London, have sought High Court injunctions to prevent protesters from disrupting major roads. I should have put those the other way around. They sought those injunctions, and if you break those injunctions, bad things can happen, basically, right? And the government's kind of cracked down on protests, haven't they? May and June 23, there was new legislation under the Public Order Act. Essentially, the police have more powers to prosecute or to arrest and whatnot if you interfere with the operation or use of key national infrastructure in England and Wales, including roads, railways, and air transport. So you can only restrict a protest beforehand if the police could show that it would result in serious public disorder, serious damage to property, or serious disruption to the life of the community. The threshold for serious disruption is now lowered, so if you delay day-to-day activities like completing a journey, the police now have the power to stop your protest.
I think, when we have in medicine, we sort of measure the risk of we measure the risk of medicine against the alternative risk of doing nothing, right? So if you have a medicine that could potentially have some adverse effects, like chemotherapy, you measure the adverse effects against the adverse effects of doing nothing at all, so that there's actually a scale there, right? It's a relative scale of okay, yes, this medicine is dangerous, but it's more dangerous to do nothing, right? I would love if our sentencing was sort of similarly weighted in terms of this disrupted this amount of people for this amount of time, but if we don't fix climate change, then it will disrupt all people for the rest of time.
That would be great, but that would also require the government being on our side. And if they were, we wouldn't have to protest.
Well, it would require the courts to be on our side, which are slightly separate, but yes.
No, I mean, as in, this was pushed through by Priti Patel, wasn't it?
The Crimes and Sentencing Bill is. Yeah. That is government. I just mean that, but then the way that law is interpreted can be, I don't know how much power the courts have to change how they interpret laws. That might be set on a legislative level, but an individual judge theoretically could go, well, I'm actually, in my judgment, weighing this against the potential of not doing anything about climate change. They're probably not going to do that because they'd probably be ousted fairly quickly. But,
absolutely, yeah.
But it would be interesting.
But the point being that the police can restrict, a protest for basically nothing at this point. A protest is likely going to cause disruption of someone's journey, right? Or disruption of day-to-day activities. That's kind of the point of a lot of protests. And also locking on, where you attach stuff to a building, object, or other people. That's now a criminal offense, which is insane. Can we be really clear about this? And actually, I'll give you a quote first, and then I'll say what I've got to say. So this isn't protest, this is crime, and there's a difference. That was the Assistant Commissioner, Matt Twist, I believe, for the Met some police. Who cares? They're all bastards anyway. But essentially, people are trying to draw a line between crime and protest, and that's stupid. I'm sorry for swearing. I'm sorry for getting irate here, but that is insanely idiotic, okay? Because protesting is going to be breaking the law at some points, right? If you were able to do a protest entirely within the bounds of the law, then what you're saying is essentially the government can dictate what you're allowed to protest. So then protesting the government is going to be kind of difficult because the government would have to be on your side. The entire point of cracking down on all of this sort of stuff is so that the government has to face less bloody scrutiny, right? Okay, cool. We can make as many parliamentary petitions as we want, okay? Oh, Parliament are going to discuss this, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Great, fantastic. But is that going to cause as much change as a load of people getting together and marching and saying, listen to us or else, right? Saying it's crime, that's different. Shut up. Crime is what the government decides what crime is, right? That is a nonsense thing. Saying this is crime and that's bad is stupid. It is fundamentally just moronic because crime is just a thing that some people have decided is crime. Whether a protest is morally justified or not is entirely, and I mean entirely, unrelated to whether or not it is criminal, because something being criminal or not is really there is no moral justification there, or rather there can be moral justification, but the very sort of fact of whether something is a crime or not has no bearing on its moral justification.
I've got a fun protesting loophole for you.
Go for it.
That I've just thought of. So, tandem bikes?
Yes.
Where you have lots of bikes, one big long bike.
Two bikes in one, yeah.
Yeah, well, imagine it's 5 bikes in one or 10 bikes in one. Oh. Or you want to make your own tandem bike by chaining a bunch of your bikes together. So me, you, Noah, Evan, bunch of people, we all get our individual bikes and we chain all of our bikes together perfectly legally. We just want our bikes to stay together.
Yeah.
And then to make sure we don't lose our bikes, we chain ourselves to our bikes, right? Just perfectly legally, we chain ourselves to our bikes. Then we find an area where there are bike locks on both sides of the street. And whoever's at the front of the big long tandem bike, they just lock their bike onto the bike lock so that the bike doesn't get stolen. And then whoever's at the back, they also they also lock their bike onto the perfectly legally usable bike lock to make sure their bike doesn't get stolen. And now we're spanning a road, but I'm only chained to my own property, and maybe you at the front are chained to perfectly legally used bike locking area. Great, we've blocked a street, broken no laws. Genius.
Don't try that, please. Great idea, Luke.
If I see that
Don't
on the news
try
with Just
that.
Oil, I'm going to be so proud.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. You know, whether or not things are legal, I think, is ridiculous to bring up. And fundamentally, cracking down on protests, if you see a government doing that, you should be worried, because that means that they know people have a point, probably, right? Like, you're not going to crack down on this stuff if you don't want to limit it. And if you want to limit it, there's a reason behind that. And the reason is likely not, oh, these guys are absolute nutters and they're saying absolute nonsense, right? Because if they're absolute nutters, then you can get them other ways, right? No one's going to be behind their protests or whatever. The thing is that, you know, the government is genuinely probably quite scared that these protests are going to cause actual change that is not good for their pockets, because they make money from oil and whatnot, often, allegedly. Whatever I need to say for people to not get mad at me legally. Anyway, cost of policing. Do you want to know how much it costs? Doesn't matter, because who gives a shit? No, but 7.7 million, apparently, the 515 protests in London since April had cost the Met 7.7 million, which is the equivalent of 23,500 officer shifts. I would argue...
That's not very much.
It's not much, and also...
On a countrywide scale.
It's just London.
Okay, right, but still, for the whole of London?
Yeah.
That's like less than £1 a person.
Yeah, but also, do you need to police those protests that much? Like that much? Maybe decrease policing and you'd be better off. Also, you're spending money on a shitload of policing that you don't need. For example, it's not very easy to get someone to respond to a mental health crisis. Often people will call the police. It's probably a bigger waste of police time than keeping protesters safe, but we all know that they're not keeping protesters safe unless they're, you know, Nazis or whatever. Not even joking. That is genuinely something that's happened. Go on, look it up for yourself. Sorry, this one got political. Anyway, I've got to speed on. But yeah, Met also spent 7.5 million policing the group's activities between October and December 2022. They between that in that period, I think from April to July 2023, they issued 420 Section 12 orders to clear roads and arrested more than 270 people. Probably didn't need to do that, personally, I think. Probably didn't need to do that. And so let's go on to whether the Just Stop Oil protests work. So I've got a quote here from the author of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Andreas Malm. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, you're not listening probably, so maybe I'm in the clear. The quote here is, "Better to die blowing up a pipeline than to burn impassively. But we shall hope, of course, that it never comes to this. If we resist fatalism, it might not." But yeah, where do you think people stand on these protests?
Well, I think most people, unfortunately, stand very against Just Stop Oil because they're sort of preoccupied, and they've sort of been whipped up into a frenzy by the right-wing media to a certain extent, I think. And they're preoccupied with like, well, I wouldn't like it if I couldn't get to work, or I wouldn't like it if this thing happened to me. Of course, and no, of course, the point is that you don't like it. That's sort of the point, unfortunately.
But look, when are the protests that are pleasant? What about a protest where they give me ice cream and pat me on the head and say I'm a good little boy?
And also, like, there are lots of protests where you could feasibly make the argument that, like, well, someone died because of this protest against Donald Trump that like took up the entirety of central London because this ambulance had to go a longer route, and then someone like that will happen, and probably, obviously is horrible. So I think most people are against it. I think Extinction Rebellion just started to get public support on average until they had that one thing with the train where they blocked a bunch of people using public transport to get on a tube. But generally, I think people understand this stuff through the media, where it's just about like going, this thing's disruptive, and very little focus is put on what's actually, number one, what they're arguing, like what they're saying we should do, and number two, whether climate change will be really bad, and whether the kind of point they're ultimately making is a good point. point.
That's interesting.
Am I wrong?
Well,
you're
not wrong. You're not entirely right, I would say.
Okay.
But no, it is quite an interesting one. So just some stats here for you. In the US, 69% of people support the country becoming carbon neutral by 2050. In the UK, a poll by the ONS found that 74% of adults surveyed reported feeling very or somewhat worried about climate change, while an Ipsos survey found that the majority of people continue to support most net zero policies. Omnisys last year, I think this is last year, I hope this is last year, at some point that was before now, they found that 66% of people in the UK support taking non-violent direct action to protect the country's nature, but a more recent YouGov poll found that 6 in 10 Brits think defacing art or public monuments should be made a specific criminal offence. Now, here, that's where you see a little bit of what is it? The dichotomy, the thing in your brain.
Cognitive
dissonance. That's it. Yeah, cognitive dissonance, wherein people think, non-violent protest is good. Wait, no, not that one. I don't like that one. Guys. No, you probably should like that one. But yeah, no. So what I'm kind of getting at here is that people broadly support, fighting against climate change or, doing things to stop climate change.
Yeah.
But these protests are not very well liked. So this is Dana Fisher, a sociologist at the University of Maryland in the US. We are woefully under-researching the different types of climate protest and their impacts, even though we know that civil society is going to play a huge role in the clean energy transition as well as in climate action that come. So essentially, we've not got a lot of research on this, so we can't super sort of clearly talk about how these protests sort of impact people, but we do have some information on it. So the activist dilemma is the first thing I want to bring up. Have you heard of that at all?
The activist's dilemma?
Yes.
No.
Okay, so it's this kind of idea that's come out of some experiments that we've done, wherein some research has showed that we've kind of looked at how people react to protests. Essentially, there's a few different studies on this. One that I want to look at, they basically sort of showed people different sort of protests, all of them fake, right? Violent protests, some of them peaceful protests, and I think as the control, some people were shown basically nothing. All of these sorts of things were fictitious, and then they kind of sort of wanted to see how this affected the sort of person's view of the issue and whatnot. Now, in one of the studies that I've seen, or a few of the studies that I've seen, there's not actually necessarily the biggest effect, in terms of I think one looking at Republicans and Democrats. Republicans, there was basically no effect on whether, there was a really violent sort of whatever protests and compared to a very sort of peaceful protest that didn't really affect their view on the issue. I think Democrats had a slight effect on them, whereas generally the main thing that causes an issue is when things get extreme, it's just violence, there's a negative connotation to violence, and that can kind of impact support. And that's pretty much it from what I've seen. We talk about the activist dilemma as an activist need to choose between sort of being more moderate with their sort of direct action, and doing bigger things that get more publicity. But those bigger things with more publicity might cause people to turn against them and their cause. That's the kind of idea there. But again, from what I've seen generally, the only sort of extreme action that reduces support for the social movement's sort of central cause is violence, right? It's just violent protests. People are like, "Ooh, you're blowing up a school? Maybe I'm not in support of climate change." You know what I mean? But when it comes to agreeing with the cause but not the methods, that basically encapsulates it. People seem to agree with causes and not the methods, and that is it. So even though the methods they disagree with, it doesn't impact their support for the cause itself. There are a few articles you can kind of look at that are linked below that kind of discuss this in more detail. I'll talk again about the sort of Republicans versus Democrat study. It was published in 2020. It was kind of looking at this. Basically, they did a survey to look at their sort of political beliefs and whatnot, and specifically their beliefs on climate change. And then they read a fake news story about one of 3 different kinds of protest: a peaceful march, civil disobedience or violence, and civil disobedience or violence, right? So you know what a peaceful march is. It's a peaceful march. Civil disobedience would be that sort of like, more disruptive thing that we were talking about, like sort of locking on and like gluing yourself to a road or whatever, things like that. And violence, right? We know what violence is. And control group, they didn't read anything. And now, apparently the peaceful marches had a positive impact for both independents and Democrats when it came to their climate beliefs. So it's like, oh yes, that's good. This has made me believe in the cause more. But civil disobedience had a positive effect amongst Democrats, and amongst Republicans, there was no effect seen. So the different stories didn't impact their beliefs at all. But sort of most importantly, I think, to take from this is that there wasn't any sort of backfire effect. A negative protest didn't result in negative thoughts on the cause itself. There's different information on this. There are studies that show that, as I've said, that sort of violent or extreme protests can impact sort of support for a cause. But again, I, from what I've seen, it largely seems to be violence, and there's not a huge amount of data on this, so it could kind of go either way. But what we have seen is that, for example, I think with Insulate Britain, after their protests, the protests began, 13th of September 2021. So in the months after that, the number of mentions of the word insulation, not insulate, specifically insulation, doubled in the UK print media. So those protests doubled the sort of talk of insulation. And the key point here about it not being insulate and specifically being insulation means that, like, you're not just talking about Insulate Britain there. You're not saying, oh, Insulate Britain have done these protests, blah, blah, blah. There's more talk of insulation, which is kind of the entire point.
Yeah, but could that not be about, like, Insulate Britain have closed the M25? They are campaigning for greater levels of insulation in houses.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
But that's still the causes.
Sure. What I'm getting at is that it's not like independent articles going, we should probably insulate our houses more, and not mentioning Insulate Britain. It's still, it's not just... It's still potentially, at least, within the confines of talking about what Insulate Britain are doing.
Sure, yes, but in saying insulation, you then are specifically talking about why they're doing what they're doing. Do you know what I mean?
It sounds a little bit more when it's like, oh, you closed the M25. You're like, what? Why have you done that? And then you go like, oh, because we need to insulate our homes because, like, energy efficiency. You go, oh, well. Yeah, I could probably get behind that.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's it. The idea is
sort extreme, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's called sort of setting the agenda, right? You want to sort of seed the sort of ideas. So you're not telling people what to think, but you're kind of controlling the conversation by saying, this is what we're going to talk about. This is what we need to talk about. Yeah. And that's the key point there, right? That, like, regardless of whether people were saying, oh, Insulate Britain bad or Insulate Britain good or whatever, more people were talking about insulation, even if it's in the context of Insulate Britain. They have made people talk about this thing that they need people to talk about, that they want people to talk about. And that's kind of the entire point. This is a quote from an article I was reading. Pollsters concluded that the sudden surge in concern is undoubtedly boosted by the publicity raised for the environmental cause by Extinction Rebellion, which had recently occupied prominent sites in central London for 2 weeks. There's also evidence that home insulation has risen up the policy agenda since Insulate Britain protests. Basically, what's kind of gone on here is that when you do these big protests, this stuff is spoken about more, right? And I think the environment, sort of environmental issues, climate issues, I think are now one of the top three issues for people in Britain now. I think that's kind of changed in recent years, which, again, like, saying that these protests have done nothing for that would probably be misguided, right? Like, you can disagree with the protests, you can disagree with the methods. I think you're wrong, but ultimately they get the conversation going where it was not going before. I think the way to view this is that, yes, they're being disruptive. Yes, they're impacting normal people. Should they go to the people at the top who can make the decisions? Yeah. But when that happens, it doesn't always work, right? Like, you've had people like, what is it, Finn or Jack Harries? I can't remember which one it is, but whichever one of them is...
It's Jack.
It's Jack. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sorry for not remembering which of the Harries twins it was, Luke. I didn't pay that much attention. But, getting involved with, I think, Extinction Rebellion, right? Yeah. And they would, like, it was going into these sort of big oil meetings, whatever, the sort of big things that they did, the big where all the oil people get together,
galas and dinners and stuff,
and they'd infiltrate that, they'd cause disruption there, but that's not going to stop these people, right? Because these people care about money, these people care about power, and if you impact normal people, then normal people know more about it. And if you as a normal person want the protests to stop, put pressure on the people that can make the change, because those sort of protests aren't necessarily going to impact people who are able to make the decisions. What is more would convince people that can make decisions more, I would say, would be a big group of people saying, hey, no, we disagree with this. And that big group of people can be brought into the cause by having it shoved in their face in a way that they can't ignore. It's like, hey, do you know we're destroying the planet. These are the effects that this government is having on us. Do you want that to happen? No, I don't. Well, then put pressure on your government, right? And yes, it's disruptive. Yes, it's annoying, but grow up and get over it. Grow up and get over it. Like, we're going to have far worse problems if we don't stop this climate catastrophe, right? And it's very easy for people to think of the now more so than the future, right? The idea of climate change is so nebulous and so not it's not concrete. It's not in the present. It's not here and now. It's not something you can see, feel, touch, and like experience presently. It's much more sort of conceptual. And I think that makes it a lot easier for people to write it off, which is kind of what happens here. You see Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain and Extinction Rebellion do these massive protests, and and people are like, well, this is disruptive. This is impacting my everyday life. This is a problem. What they're doing is nothing in comparison to what's going to happen if we don't stop climate change. And ultimately, right now, we need to put more pressure on governments. We need to do that in order to, and not just governments, oil companies and all of these sorts of things, in order to, limit the effects of climate change. Because we're past the point, by the way, of stopping it. No chance of that. We can limit the damage. That's where we are now. And so setting the agenda by getting these things in conversation is really bloody important. Getting this stuff spoken about on even daytime TV and whatnot is good, because look, Good Morning Britain is not going to say, oh, look, these protests happened. Now let's talk about nothing. No, they'll get someone on and they'll debate whether the protests are good or not. And in the middle of that debate, the person who's, on the Just Stop Oil side is going to be like, also, here's why they're doing it. There you go.
Or you'll get amazing moments like that guy on talk radio where he was like, concrete goes on trees. And do you remember this?
No.
So if you look this up on YouTube, if you're watching, you know what I'm talking about. There's a guy who was interviewing someone on, I think, talk radio, and he was interviewing like a climate protester or something like that. And he was talking about renewables. And basically the guy goes, concrete doesn't grow on trees. It's not renewable. And then the guy interviewing him goes, yes, it does. Because his only instinct is just to disagree with everything this person's saying. That's all he's there to do. And you reveal in that moment that like the stupidity of some of the arguments being made at these people. I'm sure there are some very intelligent arguments you could make against the types of action that these like campaign groups are arguing, or at least some nuance to go, it's actually quite complicated, or like if we stopped making oil, then for example, energy prices are going to go up, right? There's plenty of interesting and intelligent arguments you can make and conversations you can have. Not ones I would ultimately, at the end of the day, agree with, but there are intelligent, nuanced debates to be had. More intelligent than yes, it does, or whatever you say, I'm just going to say the opposite of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, but I mean, I would, and I'm sure you agree when I say what I'm about to say, is that all of these intelligent, nuanced debates kind of are rendered moot by like, oh, well, energy costs will go up. They're going to go up anyway.
Yeah.
And they're going to, sure. Doesn't matter how high they are when you're dead. But no, go on.
But what I find so interesting is moments like that really show you, it's like the mask slipped, right?
Yeah.
It's the mask slipped, and what we thought was an intelligent debate is really just, I don't like you, I don't like what you're saying, and I disagree with you fundamentally on some emotional level. And there's not any actual intelligence going on behind there.
Yeah.
In the case of this specific one interview that I'm talking about. And that was just such a brilliant moment. And on the sort of progressive side of like, we need to do something about climate change, that stuff is very energizing, because you go, oh my God, this guy's just shown himself to be a total idiot.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I just want to like kind of chat a little bit more, just kind of tie it up in a little bow, the sort of sides that we've got on this, so as I've said, there's the activist dilemma wherein, activists kind of need to decide how far can we go.
Yeah,
if we
it
go
sounds like
too
there's
far.
a balance to be made. There's a specific level that's the best, most effective thing.
But generally, it, as I've said, it's like, you know, so an article, this is a study that was done. So some participants read articles describing moderate protests, such as peaceful marches. Others read articles describing more extreme and sometimes violent protests. For example, a fictitious action in which animal rights activists drugged a security guard in order to break into a lab and remove animals. And if protesters that that did sort of more extreme actions are perceived to be more immoral, and they've got people will have a sort of lesser emotional connection and social identification with those protesters. But the effects of that kind of action on the support is kind of mixed, right? The results we've got on that are kind of mixed. Some of the negative effects might be specific to actions that incorporate the threat of violence, is like quite literally written in my notes in front of me. So as I've said, it seems to be that like violence is the main thing. And also, you know, I want to be clear here, right? Like ultimately my view of this is that any sort of non-violent protest that is disruptive in that sort of way when it comes to climate change, there's like I've got a very high bar for sort of like what is acceptable.
Yeah.
Right. You know, as in like you're going to have to meet my ceiling, you're going to have to do a lot. Like you're going to have to cause a lot of damage or a lot of disruption in order for me to be like, that's not okay. Right. Purely because I'm aware of sort of how massive this climate issue is, and go ahead and watch that Lena Norm's podcast if you want to have more information on that, because Lena is fantastic and the podcast will teach you a lot in a very sort of cozy, fun way. But ultimately, I want to be clear that I personally think that activists, climate activists specifically, there's a lot that they could do and it be fine, right? Cause a lot of disruption. They can cause a lot of disruption. But I want to be very clear that the sort of data on this is mixed, right? I don't want to let my beliefs sort of influence the data too much. To be clear, yes, there is evidence that this sort of stuff can impact people's sort of belief in a cause. To my understanding, it's largely violence that causes that. What instead happens is that, you know, it's sort of a view of the protesters rather than a view of the cause itself. But again, look into this because I could absolutely be biased, and you sort of, you know, that could be coloring what I'm saying. And I want to try and be as unbiased as possible here, and allow you all to make your own sort of decisions, and take your own understanding from it. But some studies have found that extreme protest actions can reduce support. But ultimately, if we talk about the sort of science of the Just Stop Oil protests, I would say that we're in a situation wherein we're not necessarily probably going to be making people believe in the cause less by sort of by supporting these protests. And if anything, these protests are getting more people talking about the things that we need to talk about. They're getting the information to more people, and they're actually causing change. Like the divestment movement, massive protests have had an actual impact of like universities and whatnot, basically sort of not necessarily meeting the demands exactly of those protesters, but like, you know, sort of not investing as much in sort of fossil fuels and whatnot, right? Like we can see clear sort of impacts of these kinds of protests, positive impacts. And ultimately, stop being so mad at Just Stop Oil, I think, and be mad at the people that are causing Just Stop Oil to do what they do. And a quick last thing, people are saying it's funded by an oil heiress. Yes, she's an heiress to an oil tycoon, or she's the granddaughter of an oil tycoon, Eileen Getty. It's part funded by her. Well, actually, the Climate Emergency Fund is part funded by her, and Just Stop Oil is funded by the Climate Emergency Fund. And trying to make out that Just Stop Oil is a psyop made by an oil heiress is kind of insane when you think about it. And even if it is a psyop, man, they're getting people to talk about it. It's just chill the planet. That's what I want to say. Got anything else to say, Luke?
Only that I'd say if you live in the UK, please check out Chris Packham's documentary on Channel 4 called Is It Time to Break the Law? Where he presents a very new... Chris Packham's like a naturalist, is that the right word? Not a naturist. He's not a nudist. He likes nature. And he studies nature. And he presented a very nuanced argument of like, okay, this is really serious and we really need to do something about it. And none of the normal systems seem to be working. Is breaking the law, not breaking the law as in like necessarily to the level of blowing up a pipeline, but like to the level of like gluing yourself to the floor or like throwing some paint on a building that houses some government department that's not doing what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Is it time to do that? And he presents a very good argument, so I'd recommend checking that out.
Well, fantastic. Luke, thank you very much. There's just one last thing to do. It's a quickfire quiz.
Dun 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 dun. Just a bullet edition.
The rules for the quickfire quiz are the same as always. I'll ask one question. That's one question between you and the audience. The first person to buzz in, answer the question after I finish asking it wins. What did he win this time, Luke?
A barrel of oil, but they get to put it back under the ground. You have to. You can't use it. You can't burn it.
Okay. And my question for you is climate change good?
Jury's out. No, it's not good. It's not good. Do you answer yes? Naughty, naughty boy.
Ding, ding, ding. I'll give that one to you only because I want this to end much, much quicker. And that is it from us. But before we go, we'd like to thank all of our patrons with an extra special thank you to executive producers Denito and Glitch Rabbit. And thank you for watching. You can find the full references for this episode down in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday. And why not leave us a nice wee comment? You can support the pod at patreon.com/SciGuys or finding contact us at SciGuysPod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and at SciGuys on TikTok too. Or you can send us an email at SciGuysPod@gmail.com.
That's SciGuysPod@gmail.com. SciGuysPod, that's my bit, at gmail.com.
That was my bit, at gmail.com. You can follow me at NotCorey everywhere.
You can follow me at Luke Upfold everywhere.
Bye, I guess.
Bye, I guess.
Bye.